Now, another partner that's proving to be tricky for the government's Brexit negotiations is, of course, Scotland. Well, joining me now from Aberdeen is Alex Salmond. Hello to you.
Hello, Sophie.
So you're going to be setting out your 50 amendments to the Article 50 bill. Now, we certainly don't have time to go through them all. So can you just try and give us the edited highlights?
Well, it's 50 amendments because that's to give a sign that we intend to hold the government to account. That's actually what oppositions are meant to be for. Most of these amendments are the sort of things that would be spelt out in a white paper. Now, the government has conceded it's going to have a white paper, but bizarrely, they say they're not going to have it till after the vote, which is quite extraordinary. I mean, if you cast your mind back to the independence referendum, I published, in Scotland, I published a 670-page white paper, but that was before people voted. The government says they're going to have a white paper after MPs vote on invoking Article 50. But there are two very big substantial amendments. One is called the Reset Amendment, and that says, look, MPs shouldn't be in a position at some point in the next year or so where they can either vote on a really bad deal on negotiations or no deal. I mean, that's no choice whatsoever. So there should be a reset to the UK being in the EU on existing terms so as MPs don't vote with a gun to their heads. And secondly, there has to be agreement with the countries of the United Kingdom. I mean, Theresa May, when she became Prime Minister, said she was looking for an agreed UK position, but she hasn't done that. And we have an amendment which says she won't be able to invoke Article 50 until she does do that.
I want to talk a bit more about this reset amendment that you are proposing, which means that the UK will effectively stay on in the EU if no deal can be agreed. That's effectively just saying that you're never going to be able to get a good deal, isn't it? Because then surely what's in the interest of the EU to give us a deal?
Well, I don't agree with that. See, the problem that Theresa May, I mean, let's forget the fact that I'm a very strong supporter of Europe and a strong supporter of Scotland. I look at it from the point of view of a Brexiteer Prime Minister. If she invokes Article 50, as she intends to do, without at least an outline of where she's going to arrive at, then she's in a position that all the EU negotiators have to do is not agree over the next 2 years, and then the UK gets the worst deal of all, which is a reversion to World Trade Organization terms. All of the negotiating power goes into the hands of the EU. And the only reason we've got this ridiculous 31st of March deadline is because it was something she dreamt up at the Tory party conference to try and hang the Tory party together. Now, far, far better not to allow yourself to go into negotiation without at least an outline of where you're going to get at the end of the day.
The thing is, though, that some people will look at this. They'll say that the SNP are threatening 50 amendments. You're trying to stop Brexit happening. You're trying to stop the democratic process that happens after the referendum was won.
Well, of course, the democratic process, you'll understand that the SNP pay attention to that every single local authority area in the whole of this country of Scotland voted to remain in the European Union.
But Scotland's a part of the UK still. You lost the referendum.
Yeah, well, Scotland is a nation. It's a country, not a county. We have national rights. But if Theresa May wants to come to terms with Scotland, as she promised to do when she said she would have an agreed position, then all she has to do is accept the compromise position, which has been put forward by Scotland's First Minister Nicola Sturgeon, and allow Scotland the flexibility of remaining in the single marketplace after Brexit. Now, remember, we know there's going to be a special deal for the car industry in Sunderland. There'll have to be a special deal for Northern Ireland. There's one for the Channel Islands. There's going to have to be one for Gibraltar. You know, if it's good enough for the car industry in Sunderland, then surely it's good enough for the nation of Scotland.
Now, if none of your amendments do get passed, which is, definitely possible, the UK leaves the EU and it leaves the single market. Do you feel that a second Scotland referendum is inevitable? And if so, when's it going to happen? One senior SNP this week suggested autumn 2018. Is that about right?
Well, if Theresa May bulldozes her way and says we're not staying in the single market, there'll be no concessions, and then says that we won't pay any attention to Scotland and Scottish jobs and Scottish investment, then, as the First Minister has said, a renewed independence referendum becomes very likely. And in my view, it should be held within the 2-year period, so Scotland would have the option of a continuous membership of the EU, or certainly of the European Economic Area. That would be the the sensible and logical time to have it.
But you're going to have to choose at some point, aren't you? Because there's no way that Scotland can be in the single market of the EU and also be in the single market of the UK. You're going to have to make a decision on that at some point.
Well, I don't think that's correct, incidentally. If you look at the proposal Nicola Sturgeon's put forward, then it argues that you could be within the single marketplace and still be within the UK customs union. And there's an exact analogy for that in Europe at the present moment between Liechtenstein and Switzerland. Liechtenstein and Switzerland are in a monetary union, a customs union, a passport union, but Liechtenstein is within the European Economic Area and the single marketplace, and Switzerland is not. So it's really a bit rich for unionists to tell us something can't be done when there's already working of examples of exactly that elsewhere in Europe. We just have to have the political imagination to try and meet the interests of the Scottish people, and that's the proposal that Nicola Sturgeon has put forward.
Now, I'm quite keen to talk to you about Donald Trump, the President of the United States, and I think it's fair to say that you two haven't always been the best of friends. I think Mad Alex is the term that he likes to describe to speak of you. So what do you make of his first week's work in the White House, and in particular, of course, this ban on people entering the US from Muslim-majority countries?
Well, perhaps there should be a moral tale for Theresa May. I mean, I went from, according to Donald Trump, the greatest politician in the world, which is how he described me, to Mad Alec destroying Scotland with no intervening period whatsoever. You know, he's a very, very difficult person to stay on good terms with. You know, look, there was a moment yesterday which tested Theresa May's mettle when she stood with President Erdogan, and she was asked by Sky News, I think, 3 times the cock crowed to condemn his shameful actions and the blanket ban on people from Muslim states going to the United States with all the misery and confusion that's causing, and she refused to do so. That was a shameful moment, not just for Donald Trump. I mean, we're beginning to expect these sort of actions from him, but a shameful moment of cowardice from the UK Prime Minister, and it shows just how much you can go into thrall to such a person if you've been dealing with him from a position of weakness, as Theresa May is.
And just very briefly, Mr. Salmond, with that in mind, do you think that the offer of a state visit to the UK for President Trump should now be withdrawn?
Well, I think it's a very bad idea, and I think you shouldn't be rushing into a headlong relationship with the President of the United States. I mean, quite clearly his first week in office has indicated that. As for the suggestions from the Trump office that we read this morning, he doesn't want to meet Prince Charles. I mean, there's very few people who come to this country on a state visit and try to decide which members of the royal family they shall and shan't meet. And that's just an indication of sort of enormous difficulties you get into when you hold somebody tight who is unpredictable, who has a range of views you find unacceptable. And the one thing I can tell you about Donald Trump, and absolutely this is from personal experience, you should never, ever, ever negotiate or deal with Donald Trump from a position of weakness. And that is exactly what Theresa May has been doing.
OK, Alex Salmond, thank you.